All right, first of all, how about a round of applause for Todd Kwait in putting together this very informative film? Todd, the question is, were the filmmakers aware that the declassified documents call Priscilla Johnson McMillan a willing collaborator of the CIA, and that she applied for work at the CIA in the 1950s?
So I'm aware that she applied to the CIA for work in the 1950s, and I'm also aware that she told me she was not given the job. So as far as whether or not she was a collaborator, we can, I suppose, direct that to Dr. Robarge, but she did tell me that, and she was not given the job. It was something she was interested in doing. I can answer that. While we are waiting for Ruth Paine, but I'm going to introduce our panel, and we've got here Judge Burt Griffin, Bernard Weissman, Dr. David Robarge, who's the chief historian for the CIA, Howard Willens, and David Slawson. I'm going to give you the next question here, Brendan. Why don't you read this?
All right.
It's for our panel.
To the panel, if the truth to be told, why has Pat Hall not been interviewed? She remembers Oswald. Anyone wish to take that on?
Let me paraphrase. Does anybody know who Pat Hall is or remember Pat Hall? Pat Hall.
I am Pat Hall, and I am the granddaughter of Gladys Johnson, who was the landlady of the...
Oh, we met you yesterday. Yes.
And I find that documentary people, producers and all that, they don't come and ask the questions about who I knew as a little girl, who my grandmother rented a room out to a young man.
Well, I think what I can answer that this investigation is over and been over for a number of years. Obviously, have you given an oral history to the Sixth Floor Museum?
I have.
Good. So I think that's available there, and I would encourage everybody. I met Ms. Hall briefly yesterday at Ruth Paine's presentation, and she does have a lot of interesting things to say. She does own, I believe, the rooming house where Oswald lived at the time of the assassination. So I would encourage people to go and talk to her and tour that house and view her oral history at the Sixth Floor Museum. I'm not sure the staff members can answer that specific question as to why I haven't talked to you personally.
Sorry, do you want me to just keep asking? Yeah. All right. After Oswald tried to kill the general, he buried the gun or the rifle. Next showed a picture of him with rifle taken by his wife. Did the police search grounds for the evidence or home for a bullet, and or Oswald retrieved his rifle or anything like that, or at the crime scene? Howard or Burt, anyone want to answer that?
As I understand it, there was a carefully planned route by
Hold it closer.
a route that Oswald planned to go to and from the general's house, and that there was a railroad nearby, and he chose to bury his rifle there before the evening of the attack, and he retrieved it, I'm sure, days after the attack. So it is the rifle. The rifle was used. There was nothing to suggest it had been damaged or disappeared or replaced during that interval. and I think there was some doubt initially as to whether the fragment of the bullet that penetrated the general's house could be authoritatively identified as coming from that rifle. And my recollection is that there was some doubt about it at the time, but that over the years it's generally been accepted that it can be identified as the general category of bullet that is used by such a rifle. That's all I know on the subject.
Howard, I think this goes to you. Bullet fragments on Governor Conley, the status of them. When Governor Conley was operated on, were the fragments gathered, or do they remain with the government?
There was found during the course of treating the governor, there were some grains of the bullet found on his person in the course of examining his various wounds, and that does confirm the point made in the movie by Vincent Bugliosi that this was not a pure, untainted bullet, that in fact it had lost 2.3 grains or something in that vicinity, as I recall. So it was further proof. That question has been heavily debated within the conspiracy community, but I think there's really no doubt between the work of the Select Committee and the Warren Commission that there was the single bullet as dealt with in the movie you've just seen.
Thank you. Question to the Warren Commission staff. The Warren Commission had been given the power to grant immunity. Did they grant anyone said immunity, and if you did, to whom?
I don't think they granted immunity in that sense to anyone. There was a deal made with Mark Lane. Mark Lane, as many of you know, was a very active critic of the Warren Commission even before it began functioning. And he lied to the commission with respect to the documents he had in his possession or his interview of one of the witnesses to the Tippett murder by Oswald. And I think in order to get him to appear and testify, Mr. Rankin, the general counsel, who was a phenomenal lawyer and a terrific human being, did get the authority from the Chief Justice to promise Mr. Lane that he would not be prosecuted for violating the prohibitions of recording over the telephone wires.
Okay. To Ruth Paine. Can you elaborate on the curtain rods that were stored in your garage? How many sets did you keep there? Were there any missing in March when the members asked you about them, if you recall?
There were no curtain rods in my garage at any time. This is an entire fabrication on Lee's part.
Okay, to the Warren Commission staff. How much were the attorneys paid for their work on this, and how long did they work for?
Were we getting $100 a day? Was that what were we paid? Does anybody remember?
Okay, we have two people here that were paid. David Slawson on my left was paid, and Burt was paid. I was never paid.
I don't remember the exact amount, and it wouldn't make any difference anyway because there's been so much inflation since it would be impossible. But I do remember this. I made more money than I could keep working for the Warren Commission than I did making law, practicing law in Denver. And the reason was that they paid our expenses, of living expenses. So everything I earned, which was not a great amount, but I didn't have to pay anything to live. So it was all cake, you might call it. Ice cream. You could use it for anything you wanted to. Is that about accurate for you?
Yeah, now that you mention it, that's right, David.
Yeah.
This question relates to the shots and the autopsy, I'm guessing. It says Kennedy was shot in the back to the right of the spine in shoulder blade. Ford moved the wound to the neck. There was a point, I think, where Ford moved the wound to the neck. How do you justify this huge lie?
There,
Not on this, no, go ahead.
No, yes.
I didn't even hear it.
okay, there has been continued debate about use of the words back, top of the back of the neck, and so forth. And it basically is a circus of meaningless contentions. The wound, as you saw in some of the diagrams showing Ireland Spector analyzing the trajectory, does accurately provide a picture of what happened, and the bullet holes are where they are, whether you call them back of the neck or top of the back. So I think that it doesn't make much sense. The doctors all recognized, who finally saw, those who testified before the commission testified accurately as to what they saw and what that meant in terms of the wounds and trajectory of the wounds. And those judgments were confirmed by the select committee, who did have access of all the pictures and the photographs. I did believe, as suggested in the picture, that the decision not to permit the commission to see some of those materials was a mistake. I believe that the public would have recognized a decision by the Chief Justice to let the testifying physicians see the actual x-rays and other materials about the natures of the wounds, but he did not want the public to see the photographs of the deceased president. And he had said publicly that he would publish everything that the commission relied upon. So he found himself in this dilemma, which most of us on the staff disagreed with. And in fact, the Attorney General, with whom I discussed this matter, was willing to have the commission examine the materials. And that's under those terms, the Chief Justice saw them and then took upon himself the decision not to share them with the members of the commission, the staff, or the public.
Okay.
I'd like to go back to the previous question about how much money we made. Yes. And add to that. You may have a very different idea of how much money lawyers make, because they make much more relative to the rest of the world, rest of the economy rather, today than they did then. To give you an idea of what a starting lawyer made then, I was paid, because I came there with very high academic credentials, the same as the beginning Wall Street lawyers are made, and they were paid the highest in the country. That was $5,200 a year. One of my friends I made, I was very active in the Democratic Party when I got out there, who was also active, was an electrician. He made over $6,000. I made young lawyers at the top of their starting salaries. A lot of them made a lot less than that. We're not making as much as a unionized worker.
All right, this is a question to the commission members. How did the Warren Commission know that Oswald tried to kill General Walker?
One thing is, he told Ruth Paine that he did. I mean, not Ruth Paine, I'm sorry. He told Marina, I'm sorry, forgot. He told Marina that he did.
Well, and he left this very significant note. A little tiny portion of it is in the museum there in Dealey Plaza. But it was so damning, saying, if I'm arrested, this is where the jailhouse is. Don't keep my clothes, keep my papers. If I'm killed, you know, the Soviet embassy may be able to help you. This all came to light, of course, much later and kind of accidentally because of something that I had sent. It was mentioned in the film, something I had sent to Marina through the Dallas police that I did not know had the note in it. It was a book that had the note in it. And so it was several days after the assassination that this note came to light.
This question's to Bernie. Have you been back to Dallas since you were here in 1960s?
I left Dallas about a week after the assassination, and in fact borrowed some money from a buddy so I can get home to New York, and for that drive, and I haven't been back to Dallas since, and I haven't thought too much about it over the years. Now and then it would come up in conversation with some very close friends, and but we had scattered for the most part. Some stayed out here in the West, and a couple of us went back to New York, and nothing has of note has come to pass except in the last 2 years, where this has then followed me, and the subject has come up. And there's been some interviews, but other than that, Dallas never attracted me again after that, except I still have a pair of good Acme boots that I bought here. And I did wear a string tie. And so anyway, that's my story since I left Dallas, and it's been, what, 50-odd years, and but I'm glad to be back. The town has changed.
And by the way, what was your dog's name in the movie?
Oh, that's Sassy.
Did we give her a credit? No.
To the Warren Commission members, why did the Secret Service allow the parade route to be changed?
Well, I'm not,
I have no idea.
I don't know to what that refers. I'm not aware of any significant change in the planning of the motorcade that would be relevant to this conversation. The publication of the route was shown in the newspapers as reflected in the film, and there were discussions in advance about the nature of the motorcade, but there were no serious differences among the Secret Service, the local police department, or the authorities, political authorities, as to the nature of the motorcade. It seemed a natural way to get to the highway leading to the trademark, if that's the correct institution, where he was scheduled to give a speech at luncheon. And so proceeding down Main Street and then turning left and so forth and so on was a perfectly natural route to take. And it was not known to us on the commission staff at the time or to the public at large that the Secret Service did not at the time maintain people in high buildings that were along the motorcade. They provided that kind of protection at the time only for motorcades in Washington, D.C. So whereas some of us anticipated that there were a lot more extensive surveillance by Secret Service or police representatives during the motorcade was wrong. And I do not know to what extent they have modified those practices over the last 55 years.
All right, to the CIA, David. What source was, or if any, was Priscilla McMillan to the CIA, or was she even involved with the CIA?
I didn't run across any information about her in my research dealing with the agency's interactions with the Warren Commission, so nothing to add to that.
This is actually an interesting question. When Oswald went out and got the rifle, where did he put it overnight, if we even know when he did get the rifle before the assassination, when he actually took it out of the blanket in the garage?
I can only assume that he left it in the garage, that he wrapped it up and it was there. I didn't know it was there, but its absence was very clear when the officer came.
Yeah, I think in the film, when we talked about this, when the light was left on, I think your assumption in hindsight was that he checked to see if the rifle was there or something like that.
I assumed that he had been in the garage, but that was just an assumption.
This question I'll answer because I actually, this interested me, and it's a valid question. And I did research it, but obviously for length, some things have to be omitted. The question is, since Dulles was fired by Kennedy, and I'm assuming that's after the Bay of Pigs, why was he placed on the Warren Commission? And that leads to the question as to whether or not Dulles had a bone to pick with the Kennedy family. Something that I discovered in just researching material that is out there gave me the answer to this. In March or April of 1964, when the voting registration students were in the South and were missing in Mississippi, everybody was trying to figure out what to do. And there is a phone call, which you can find on YouTube. It's also the transcripts referenced in Max Holland's book that features the relevant LBJ. He had a taping system in the White House on his phone, all of the phone calls that relate to the Kennedy assassination. And there's a call where President Johnson and Robert Kennedy call Allen Dulles and ask him to go as an emissary down to Mississippi to try to talk to the governor and see what they're doing to find these missing people. If you listen to the call and you hear the interplay between Robert Kennedy and Allen Dulles, I think you get a totally different perspective. First, it's not long after Ted Kennedy was in a plane crash. He inquires, how's Teddy doing? And Robert Kennedy says he's going to be fine. And then Dulles says to him, why are you sending me on this mission? I'm working on this other project you got me on, referring to the Warren Commission. And Robert Kennedy chuckles and he says, because we know you and we think you'll do a good job and you're respectable, and that's it. So that gave me a different take. It seemed to me that when Dulles, and he was really forced to resign, I think, after the Bay of Pigs. Yeah, but Howard, go ahead.
No, I just will add to that in fact, when he was putting the commission together, President Johnson asked Robert Kennedy to suggest the two additional members who were not from Congress, and he suggested Allen Dulles, and he suggested John McCloy. So, in fact, the Kennedy family and Allen Dulles had a very close relationship that survived the Bay of Pigs event and his necessary retirement under those circumstances.
Okay. Yeah, so that's worth people who are interested in that issue. There are things out there. I think there may be a misconception that the Kennedy family, for whatever reason, did not like Allen Dulles, and that does not seem to be the case at all. Here, I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit because it's a long question, and it basically is saying, going back to the Zapruder film, and particularly John Conley's argument that he was hit by a separate bullet, and also a dispute by Dr. McClelland, the emergency room doctor, and other emergency room doctors that thought these wounds might have come from the front. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the issues that have been raised based on comments made by the doctors at the Parkland Hospital, there are legitimate questions because, and can be answered principally by the fact that their examination was hasty and they never turned the president over. So they were looking at only half the picture, and it was only until the autopsy doctors examined the body more thoroughly that they could make informed and authoritative judgments about entry wounds versus exit wounds. So I think the Parkland Hospital attendants were sort of, shall we say, prematurely making judgments based on what they saw under the most hectic medical circumstances you could possibly imagine, with the President of the United States sitting there on a table, obviously dying, with the physicians coping with many people who shouldn't have been in the room to do what they could do to try to rehabilitate the President if that was possible. And of course it wasn't. So I think that the disputes of that sort are part of our history, and I'm not saying that the attendants are lying or trying to create conspiracies. They're just expressing their views based on what they saw, but they don't readily concede that what they saw was only a part of the total medical picture.
Here's a question, if anyone knows. We're sitting here in the Texas Theater, the exact theater where Lee Harvey Oswald was captured. Am I sitting in his seat? Does anyone know? Raise your hand.
Yes, sir.
Last row over here, facing the south.
Last row, center aisle, all the way in the back. There you go. All right, there's the winner.
So I believe I was told earlier this evening that some of those rows were removed where the soundboard is near the back of the theater. So it is possible that row was removed and may no longer be here. I think all of the seats at one time were replaced. There was, as I understand it, about 25 years ago, a fire in the theater, and some work had been done. Let me read this. I'm going to paraphrase this one again. It talks about an article from 1969 by Tom Johnson of the Dallas Morning News saying that Chief Curry made an admission that they never had any proof that Oswald fired the rifle, and that no one ever had any evidence of him in the building with a gun in his hand. Any comments on that?
They did find his fingerprints on the rifle. I don't know what you there were two eyewitnesses to a man shooting from the sixth floor window. One, I guess, can argue over the quality of their identification, but they do have witnesses who say they saw him shooting, and there's always a credibility issue in them. It was his rifle that was found up there. So, as in most criminal cases, look at in virtually, I don't know where you are on this, Brendan, but in virtually every homicide case I've seen, they don't have direct witnesses. They have lots of circumstantial evidence, and this was a circumstantial evidence case that led to the conclusion that it was Oswald that was the shooter. Do you want to say anything about it, Brendan? Yeah.
There's more questions. Hang on, I think they heard enough from me. All right, hang on.
So this one I'm going to answer first because I think it does pertain to me, but it's addressed to 4 distinguished Warren Commission staffers. So let me make my comment first, and then you can answer this. And it's rather I guess we would call this in our world a leading question. Did it ever occur to you that you may have been working for the murderers of JFK, specifically Lyndon Johnson and Allen Dulles, not to mention FBI J. Edgar Hoover, who hated the guts of the Kennedys? I'm going to answer that first because I made the film. I want you to know that this film was financed by me. I don't work for the government, never have, and I'm getting old and I'm sure they won't hire me anymore. But the fact of the matter is when I started this project, nobody placed any restrictions on the content or the conclusions reached in this film. I came to those conclusions myself, and I thought about all of these things contained in this letter. And after 5 years of working on this, I've concluded a couple of things. 2 of them are parts of human nature that I've understood and came to conclude. One, I don't think people work real well in concert together. If you ever served on like a homeowner's board, they can't figure out what color to paint the fence. Number two, when people have a secret, they kind of want to let other people know that they know the secret because that shows how important they were to know it in the first place. And I think these are very important aspects about human nature. I have seen, after working on this for 5 years straight, nothing whatsoever to implicate President Johnson, and I find it absolutely disgusting that people would blame him for it, nor do I find anything to implicate Allen Dulles in this case. And again, I would encourage you to check out the relationship he had with the Kennedys. And again, the conclusions in the film are mine. Do you have any comments to add to that?
I have one additional comment to that, and that is that I endorse thoroughly everything that Todd just said. But what is so amazing about that question, and so provocative, and is that it is as though the Warren Commission stands out there as it was 55 years ago, a report that had a lot of merit and got some criticism. But what the interrogator totally misses is the fact that the Warren Commission has lived for 55 years, and it was thoroughly corroborated and by the Select Committee on the key points of conspiracy and involvement of public agencies or any president. And I think the interrogator just sort of ignores the fact that the Warren Commission literature has elaborated on those findings over the years, and there has been, as Todd reports, no credible facts that undercut any of the key decisions by the Warren Commission or the Select Committee relating to Oswald and the bullets that wounded the president and the governor.
All right. Our final question, and this is a doozy. Can the Warren Commission also investigate who really shot J.R. Ewing? True question.
With that, we thank you. I want to thank our panel, David Slawson, Howard Willens, Dr. David Robarge, Bernard Weissman, Dr. Griffin, and Ruth Paine. Thank all of you for coming.